Welcome back to the shop. This is Jacob with the Wood Plank. Today I'm working on a couple of edge grain cutting boards. While I was looking through my lumber, I came across this very unique piece of walnut. It not only had a nice range of sapwood on each side of the board, but also had a nice dark streak that outlined the sapwood. This cutting board was inspired by this single piece of wood. One of the great things about working with walnut is it offers such a wide variety of colors and tones. You can get a dark piece of heartwood that almost looks black, all the way up to a piece of sapwood that has a nice tan color. So if you get the chance to work with walnut, you can think of it almost like paint, and you can take the darks and the lights and make more shadows and gradients. It really opens up the board designs. I decided to go to the top shelf and use a piece of curly maple I've been holding on to. I'll be building two separate cutting boards in this video. This one's going to be made of walnut, padauk, and curly maple. These are going to be slightly larger boards, so I'm cutting all of these strips to 22 inches long. You'll see a couple pieces of cherry in this shot. I was going to make a third board, but I decided not to. My favorite measurement, 2 inches and a touch. I've also been saving this piece of walnut for something special, and it has this really beautiful piece to it, this strip here that I'm cutting, and I'm going to be using this for the side of the walnut board. Now it's time to make sense of all this, and just like the walnut board, this piece of padauk had a really cool piece of sapwood. And you know, if you've watched any of my videos, sapwood is my secret sauce. I love to create things around it. So I put the sapwood up, and then I started to integrate all the other pieces in. Save that curly maple right there for the outer edges. With edge grain, those outer pieces are going to be very important. So I try to put some fancy stuff on the sides. I didn't like those two pieces of maple, how thick they were, so I wanted to, basically I just planed them down in half. Took off some material. It's a small little design detail, but to me, it just didn't quite look right, the thickness that they were, so I thinned them down and stuck them back in there. On the solid walnut board, I'm creating a slight gradient, and one thing I like to do is change the thickness of each piece. So here I'm running everything through the planer. Every strip is going to be a different thickness. I think that really helps with the color change. If you get a piece of wood that has a little bow in it, you want to point that outward. So here, I'm flipping this piece over to show you how I would glue up a piece if it had a little bow like that. Here's a quick sketch to help visualize what I mean. And then when you clamp them, they're going to snug up real nice, and over time, this will be a better glue joint than the opposite way. Just a little tip that I learned and thought I'd share with you. Unlike an end grain cutting board that takes multiple glue ups, an edge grain cutting board usually just takes one. So if you intend to sell your cutting boards, the time you save will help keep the cost down. I'm using Titebond 2 Dark on this board, which is what I always use on solid walnut boards. It is a food safe glue and also water resistant. So if you get a chance and you're building a dark board, definitely check out the Titebond 2 Dark. Your glue lines will thank you. Each one of these boards is 15 inches wide, which is bigger than my planer, so I just use my flattening sled to level things out. I wouldn't let the width of your planer stop you from making bigger boards. You could make a jig like this and really open up some new possibilities. I know for me, I used to make all my cutting boards 12.5 inches wide to fit through my planer. But along the way, I decided I wanted to start offering larger boards, which meant that I had to have a more efficient way to get them planed down. As you can see here, this jig does not have to be fancy. I have a couple of 2x4s, a few pieces of plywood, and a few pieces of hardwood for the sled section, but this is probably one of the more useful jigs in the shop. These two boards are coming along beautifully. And now you can start to see how I played with the colors of the walnut to give that board a nice gradient, and you can see the Padauk. I lost a little bit of sapwood during the flattening process, but it still has just that little sliver, which I like. And here is that piece that I cut earlier that I wanted to put on the side of that board. And here you can see the curly maple really starting to show. Those two strips of maple on the inside of the board are not curly. They're just your standard hard maple. Although after I finished this board, I wished I had used a couple of strips of figured maple in those spots, because you do get to see the ripple effect on the top of the board. After the juice groove is done, I'll switch my router bit and get ready to put the finger holds on. I get a lot of questions about what router bits I use for the Juice Groove, so I'll actually stick a link in the description below for all the different router bits I use. Another design element that I like to use is anytime I work with Padauk, I like to stick maple on the sides of it. I find it really helps pop the color. But along with that comes some careful sanding because it's easy to turn that maple red because the red sawdust just gets everywhere. So I get an air hose, I keep the sanding pad clean, I use a little microfiber cloth, and I'll wipe the sawdust off to keep that white from turning red. I like to sand up to 150 grit, then I'll spray some water and raise the grain. This is also the first chance you get to see what your board's going to look like once it's oiled. And I'm really excited for that curly maple. And I'm starting to really love the way this walnut board's coming together. After the board is dried, I'll come back through with 150 grit again, and then I'll sand up to 220, and that's where I usually stop. Next up is to install these rubber feet, which I do like to use from time to time. I have this little jig that I use to help locate the same spot on all four corners. Definitely another jig that I would highly recommend, a quick and easy one to really help your process along. Man, did this board really just come to life. So while I put the wax on this board, I thought I'd recap some of the things that I do to help an edge grain board stand out. Try to be selective with the pieces you use on the outer edges. Also, try to use sapwood as a design element. And by mixing in different width pieces, you'll get more gradients and color changes. And if all goes well, you'll end up with a board that you're just really proud of. It's been well over 8 years since I picked up a paintbrush, and this cutting board inspired me to get back to it. And I hope this video helps inspire you to try something new or to do that thing you've been wanting to get back to for too long. As always, Thanks so much for watching and sharing the journey. Until next time, take care from the Wood Plank.